Marcus Holloway had everything money could buy, yet as he stood in the marble lobby of the five-star resort in Aspen, watching his designer luggage being loaded back into the limousine, he felt more empty than ever. His perfectly planned Christmas vacation had just been canceled because the resort had overbooked, offering him a measly refund and corporate apologies that meant nothing to a man who measured his worth in zeros on a bank statement. The anger rising in his chest wasn't just about the inconvenience, it was about control, about how even his wealth couldn't prevent this moment of helplessness. He had built his empire from nothing, climbing from a childhood of poverty to become one of the youngest tech billionaires in Silicon Valley, but somewhere along that brutal ascent, he had forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to be at the mercy of circumstances beyond his control. If you believe that sometimes the universe breaks our plans for a reason, if you believe in the power of unexpected encounters and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment about a time when a disappointment turned into a blessing, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue sharing stories that touch hearts. Marcus called his assistant in frustration, demanding she find him alternative accommodations immediately. But it was Christmas Eve, and every decent hotel within 100 miles was fully booked. The wealthy families had claimed their alpine sanctuaries months ago, and there was no room at any inn for a latecomer, regardless of how much money he waved around. His assistant, her voice apologetic and strained, finally found only one option, a small family-run bed and breakfast on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that didn't even have a website, just a phone number listed in an old directory. Marcus grimaced at the thought but accepted it. Grudgingly, he had no choice, and his private jet had already returned to California. As the car wound through increasingly modest neighborhoods, past humble homes decorated with strings of colorful lights and inflatable snowmen, Marcus felt his irritation deepen. This wasn't how a man of his status should spend Christmas. The Pine Haven bed and breakfast was nothing like what Marcus was accustomed to. It was a converted Victorian house with peeling paint on the porch railings and a wreath on the door that looked handmade from pine cones and red ribbon. When he knocked, a man about his age answered, wearing a flour-dusted apron and an expression of genuine surprise. Daniel Carter introduced himself as the owner, and behind him, two 6-year-old children. With matching curious brown eyes, peeked out shyly his twins, Lily and Lucas. The house smelled of cinnamon and baking cookies, a scent that transported Marcus unexpectedly back to a childhood he had spent decades trying to forget, to a time when his single mother had worked 3 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment warm. Daniel welcomed him inside with an easiness that seemed almost foreign to Marcus, who had grown used to the transactional nature of every interaction in his high-powered world. The room Daniel showed him was simple but clean, with a handmade quilt on the bed and a window overlooking a small garden buried in snow. It wasn't the luxury suite Marcus had paid for at the resort, but there was something about the space that made him pause, a warmth that had nothing to do with the radiator humming quietly in the corner. As Marcus unpacked his minimal belongings, he could hear laughter floating up from downstairs, the sound of the twins playing and Daniel's patient voice guiding them through what sounded like cookie decorating. The sound irritated him at first, this intrusion of domestic joy into his brooding solitude. But as the evening wore on, that irritation began to soften into something he couldn't quite name. Christmas Eve dinner was not what Marcus expected. Daniel apologized profusely that he had no other guests and hoped Marcus wouldn't mind joining them at their family table. Marcus, who usually ate alone in Michelin-starred restaurants while checking his phone, found himself sitting at a worn wooden table with mismatched chairs, eating homemade lasagna that was surprisingly delicious. The twins chattered excitedly about Santa Claus and what presents they hoped to find under their modest tree. And Daniel listened to them with the kind of complete attention Marcus had never given anyone as the meal progressed. Marcus learned that Daniel had lost his wife 2 years ago to cancer, and he had been raising the twins alone ever since, running the bed and breakfast to make ends meet while being present for his children. The story was told without self-pity, just a quiet determination that Marcus found himself grudgingly admiring. After dinner, Lily tugged on Marcus's expensive cashmere sleeve and asked if he wanted to help them decorate their Christmas tree. Marcus's first instinct was to decline, to retreat to his room with his laptop and bury himself in work emails, but something about the hopeful look in her eyes made him pause. He found himself in the living room, surrounded by boxes of ornaments that were clearly collected over years, each one holding a story that Daniel shared with tender nostalgia. There were ornaments the twins had made in preschool, lopsided clay stars and popsicle stick reindeer, and there were older ones that had belonged to Daniel's late wife, delicate glass angels, that he handled with reverent care. As Marcus helped hang these treasures, listening to the stories behind them, he felt something cracking inside him, some wall he had spent years building. Lucas, quieter than his sister, sidled up to Marcus and asked what his Christmas wish was. The question caught Marcus off guard, because he couldn't remember the last time he had wished for anything. He simply bought whatever he wanted. But looking at this child with his earnest expression, Marcus found himself thinking about the question seriously. What did he wish for? In the silence that followed, he realized with startling clarity that his life, despite all its material abundance, was profoundly lonely. He had no family, having distanced himself from his struggling relatives as he climbed the social ladder. He had no real friends, only business associates and people who wanted something from him. He had built an empire but had forgotten to build a life. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the old house settle and creak, and he thought about the afternoon he had spent watching Daniel with his children. There was a richness to their life that had nothing to do with money, a connection and purpose that Marcus had sacrificed long ago in his single-minded pursuit of success. He remembered his own childhood, how his mother had worked herself to exhaustion, but had always made time to read him stories before bed, how she had made their poverty feel less crushing through the sheer force of her love. He had vowed to escape that poverty, and he had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but in doing so, he had also escaped from the very things that had made those hard times bearable. Human connection, vulnerability, love. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow falling softly outside the window. Marcus woke to the sound of the twins squealing with delight downstairs, and despite his usual cynicism, he found himself smiling. When he came down to the living room, he found Daniel making hot chocolate, while Lily and Lucas opened their modest presents a second-hand bicycle to share, some books from the thrift store, and homemade wooden toys that Daniel had clearly crafted himself late at night. The joy on their faces was so pure and unrestrained that Marcus felt his throat tighten. These children who had so little, in material terms, were experiencing more genuine happiness than Marcus had felt in years. Daniel noticed Marcus standing in the doorway and invited him to join them with a warmth that suggested he truly meant it. As Marcus sat on the floor with his expensive suit pants gathering dust, watching the twins play with their simple gifts, he made a decision that would change everything. He excused himself and spent an hour on the phone, making arrangements that would have seemed impossible yesterday. When he returned to the living room, he asked Daniel if they could talk privately. In the kitchen, over coffee, Marcus told Daniel about himself, not the carefully curated biography he usually shared at board meetings, but the real story about growing up poor, about his mother who had died alone while he was closing a business deal overseas, about the guilt and emptiness that success had brought him. Daniel listened without judgment, and when Marcus finished, he simply said that it took courage to admit those things. Then Marcus made his proposal. He wanted to invest in Daniel's bed and breakfast, not just financially but personally. He wanted to help expand it into something sustainable that would provide security for the twins while maintaining the warmth and character that made it special. But more than that, he asked if he could visit regularly, if he could be part of their lives in some small way, because spending one evening with his family had reminded him of what it meant to be human. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with thoughtful eyes. Then he asked Marcus why he really wanted this, whether it was guilt or genuine connection, because his children had already lost one parent, and he wouldn't let anyone into their lives who wasn't committed to staying. The question was fair and cut right to the heart of the matter. Marcus thought about it carefully before answering, because this was perhaps the most important business proposition of his life. And, for once, it wasn't about profit margins or return on investment. He told Daniel that he didn't have all the answers, that he was broken in ways he was only beginning to understand. But that being here had cracked something open inside him, and he wanted the chance to learn how to be whole again. He promised that he would show up, not just with money, but with his time and attention, and that if Daniel gave him this chance, he would do everything in his power to be worthy of it. If this story has touched your heart, If you felt the weight of Marcus's loneliness or the warmth of Daniel's generosity, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in disappointment, and sometimes the people who change our lives are the ones we never expected to meet. The deal they struck that morning wasn't written in contracts or sealed with lawyers. It was made with a handshake and a promise, witnessed by two children who understood more about love and second chances than most adults ever would. Marcus spent the rest of Christmas Day with them, playing in the snow, eating leftover lasagna, and reading stories by the fire. It wasn't the luxury vacation he had planned, but it was the first time in decades that he felt like he belonged somewhere, that he was part of something larger than his own ambition. If you believe people can change, if you believe that it's never too late to choose connection over isolation, please comment below with the word believe. We read every comment, and your words inspire us to keep sharing these stories. In the weeks and months that followed, Marcus kept his promise. He became a regular presence at Pine Haven, not as a benefactor dispensing charity from on high, but as someone learning what it meant to be part of a family. He taught Lucas about computers and listened patiently to Lily's elaborate stories about her imaginary friends. He learned to cook Daniel's lasagna recipe and helped renovate the bed and breakfast, often working with his own hands instead of hiring contractors. Slowly, the sharp edges of his loneliness began to soften, and the house that had once felt like a last resort became the place where he most wanted to be. His business associates noticed the change in him, how he smiled more easily and seemed less driven by the need to prove something. Some thought he had lost his edge, but Marcus knew the truth. He had finally found what he had been missing all along. The Millionaire's holiday had indeed been ruined that Christmas Eve, but sometimes the best gifts come disguised as disasters, and sometimes salvation arrives in the form of a single dad and his twins who show you that the richest life has nothing to do with money and everything to do with opening your heart to love again.